Welcome to War Bios, the podcast that delves into the most pivotal conflicts in history, where strategy, leadership, and courage converge. Today, we're going to explore one of the most iconic battles of the Vietnam War, the Battle of Khe Sanh. This seven-day siege, which began on January 21, 1968, would become a defining moment in American military history, testing the mettle of soldiers, the strategic vision of commanders, and the resolve of a nation. By 1965, the U.S. had committed ground troops to support the South Vietnamese government against the Communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh. The conflict was complex, with guerrilla warfare waged by the Viet Cong in the south and a conventional army threatening from the north. The U.S. military strategy aimed to secure key areas, protect population centers, and interdict supply lines used by the enemy. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of mud, blood, and smoke hung heavy over the landscape. It was here, in this unforgiving environment, that the U.S. Marine Corps established a series of fire support bases and patrol bases near the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, which separated North from South Vietnam. One such base was Khe Sanh, located on a strategic hilltop overlooking the road junction of Route 9, a critical supply route that led west into Laos and the infamous Ho Chi Minh Trail. This remote outpost was chosen for its commanding view of the surrounding countryside, providing a vantage point from which to monitor and interdict enemy movements. The base was situated in a natural amphitheater surrounded by hills and mountains, making it a formidable defensive position. The base at Khe Sanh was initially a small affair, with a Marine outpost established on the hilltop in 1962. Over time, its importance grew, and by 1967, it had expanded into a full-fledged combat base, home to several thousand Marines, as well as artillery pieces, bunkers, and defensive positions. The Marines at Khe Sanh conducted patrols, ambushes, and reconnaissance missions, seeking to disrupt the flow of supplies and men from North Vietnam. As 1967 drew to a close, intelligence suggested that the North Vietnamese Army, NVA, was massing troops in the vicinity of Khe Sanh. The enemy's intentions were unclear, but the Marines suspected an attack was forthcoming. Preparations were made to reinforce the base, but logistical challenges in the remote location of Khe Sanh meant that supplies often had to be airlifted, leaving the defenders vulnerable to any disruption in air support. The winter of 1967-1968 saw a buildup of NVA forces around Khe Sanh. The enemy was well equipped with artillery, mortars, and small arms, and they began probing the Marine defenses, testing for weaknesses. It became clear that the NVA planned something significant, possibly even an attempt to overrun the base entirely. This would not only be a strategic blow to the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces, but also a propaganda victory for the North. As the winter of 1967-1968 wore on, the North Vietnamese Army's intentions became increasingly clear, like a gathering storm on the horizon. On January 21, 1968, the NVA launched a massive artillery bombardment against the Marine base at Khe Sanh, marking the beginning of the siege. The initial barrage was intense, with over 1,000 rounds of artillery and mortar fire raining down on the defenders like a deadly hailstorm. The Marines, well entrenched in their bunkers and defensive positions, weathered the storm, but it was clear that the NVA was determined to overrun the base. The first few days of the siege were marked by intense fighting as the NVA attempted to breach the Marine defenses. On January 23, a company of Marines from the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, conducted a reconnaissance and force mission outside the base's perimeter, seeking to gather intelligence on the enemy's dispositions and intentions. The patrol was ambushed by a large NVA force, and after a fierce firefight, the Marines were forced to withdraw back to the safety of their base. As they retreated, the sound of gunfire and explosions echoed through the hills, a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked outside the wire. As the siege continued, the Marines at Khe Sanh faced numerous challenges, including dwindling supplies, treacherous weather conditions, and the constant threat of enemy artillery fire. Despite these obstacles, the defenders remained resolute, relying on their training, discipline, and camaraderie to sustain them through the ordeal. As one Marine officer later recalled, "We knew we were in for a long haul, but we also knew that we had each other's backs." That made all the difference. The bonds of brotherhood forged in the fire of combat would prove to be a decisive factor in the Marines' ability to endure the siege. On February 5, 1968, the NVA launched a major ground assault against the base, with multiple battalions of infantry attempting to overrun the Marine defenses. The attack was repelled, but not without heavy casualties on both sides. The Marines, supported by artillery and air power, inflicted devastating losses on the enemy, including an estimated NVA soldiers killed or wounded. As the battle raged on, the landscape around Khe Sanh became a scene of utter devastation, with craters pockmarking the earth and the acrid smell of smoke and sweat hanging in the air. As the siege dragged on, the Marines at Khe Sanh began to feel the strain of constant bombardment and isolation. The base's airstrip, which had been damaged in earlier attacks, was repaired and reopened on February 10, allowing for the resumption of aerial resupply missions. However, the NVA continued to harass the defenders with artillery fire, making every movement outside the base's perimeter a perilous undertaking. The Marines lived with the constant threat of death or injury, their nerves frayed by the endless barrage of shells and rockets. On March 6, 1968, a Marine patrol from the 2nd Battalion, 26th Marines, stumbled upon an NVA bunker complex while conducting a reconnaissance mission outside the base. The ensuing firefight was intense, with both sides trading small arms and grenade fire. The Marines ultimately emerged victorious, capturing several enemy soldiers and destroying the bunker complex. As they explored the abandoned bunkers, they discovered evidence of the NVA's meticulous planning and preparation, including maps, radios, and caches of ammunition. As the siege of Khe Sanh dragged on into its final weeks, the Marines continued to face relentless artillery bombardments and sporadic ground attacks from the North Vietnamese Army (NVA). The cacophony of war echoed through the hills, a constant reminder of the enemy's presence. However, the defenders' resolve remained unbroken, buoyed by their successful repulsion of the enemy's major assaults and the knowledge that they were inflicting heavy casualties on the attackers. On March 30, 1968, a combined force of Marines and Army artillery launched a counterattack against the NVA positions surrounding the base, marking a significant shift in the battle's momentum. The operation, dubbed Operation Scotland, aimed to drive the enemy back from the base's perimeter and secure key terrain features, thereby easing the pressure on the defenders. The plan was to exploit the weaknesses in the NVA's defenses, identified through meticulous reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. As the Marines and their supporting units advanced, they encountered fierce resistance, with the enemy employing classic guerrilla tactics, booby traps, snipers, and ambushes. Over the next several weeks, the Marines made steady gains, pushing the NVA back through a series of fierce battles and gradually reclaiming control of the surrounding countryside. The fighting was intense, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The defenders' resolve was tested by the unrelenting barrage of artillery fire, which at times seemed to shake the very foundations of the base. Yet, they persevered, driven by their determination to hold the line against the enemy. As the enemy's grip on the base weakened, the defenders began to sense that the siege was finally nearing its end. On June 19, 1968, after 77 days of intense combat, the NVA abruptly broke off their attack and withdrew from the area, leaving behind a trail of destruction and thousands of dead and wounded soldiers. The conclusion of the Battle of Khe Sanh marked a significant turning point in the Vietnam War, as it thwarted the NVA's plans to capture a strategic stronghold and dealt a heavy blow to their military capabilities. Historian Ronald Spector observed, "The siege of Khe Sanh was a major defeat for the North Vietnamese, and it set back their plans for a general offensive against the cities of South Vietnam. The battle also underscored the bravery and resilience of the Marines, who had endured unimaginable hardships to emerge victorious against overwhelming odds." As one veteran of the battle noted, Khe Sanh was more than just a battle. It was a defining moment in our lives, a test of our character and our resolve. The human cost of the battle was staggering, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The Marines had lost over 700 men, while estimates of NVA casualties ranged from 10,000 to 15,000. The aftermath of the battle saw a mix of emotions, relief, exhaustion, and grief. As the defenders began to reflect on their experiences, they realized that the battle had changed them forever. The siege of Khe Sanh had been a crucible, testing their mettle and forging unbreakable bonds between the men who fought there. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.